Hey guys, welcome to another video. Today we're going to talk about how you can find your own profitable niche or target market or target audience. They're both very interconnected, and I've seen people use different expressions for each of them. Now, if you are new to this channel, this video is different than anything else that you've seen on YouTube, anything else that you've really seen online available for free, because what I'm really trying to do with this YouTube channel is I want to create a collection of free masterclasses where I teach you how to build your own online business from scratch based on the experiences I've had with coaching hundreds of students and helping them set up their full online businesses. Now, what I'm not going to do is give you quick 5-10 minute videos with like tricks and hacks and formulas. I'm not doing any of that because I believe that the best way to learn how to build an online business is to really understand it on a very deep level. And that's why I'm creating these masterclasses that sometimes they're like 60-90 minutes long, because I feel like going deeper into the subject and really walking through different frameworks and what works and what doesn't, through different examples and scenarios and so on, really helps you understand what it takes to build an online business, and then actually helps you do it. So I've created these videos to make it easy for you to implement the ideas that I share with you and put them into the action. And I try to keep them on a level that I could, sell for like $1,000, $2,000 online course. But as I said, I am giving them away to you for free because I don't sell informational online courses anymore. And all I do is coaching. And I really want the information I have in my head to be available for you online. So you're going to benefit from this video if you are an online entrepreneur, you want to sell things like online courses, online coaching programs, even if you want to sell your own software, even if you are a freelance copywriter and you want to choose a niche for yourself. If you're looking for some kind of a niche, in your industry, then you're going to find this video valuable for sure. Okay, so let's look at what we're going to be covering today. We're going to be covering 3 key things. So one, we're going to talk about conventional advice. And conventional advice about finding your niche or finding your target audience, I feel like it's very abstract. I feel like it's very theoretical. I think it's not very practical, and I just think it doesn't work. Like, it doesn't really help people. It blocks them more than it helps them. So I'll cover the conventional advice and just explain why I haven't seen it work as well as some people say it does. And I'm going to give you alternative approaches that do actually work. So how I'm going to do that is number 2, I'm going to take you through what I call the slice and dice technique for finding your target audience. And this is a technique that I shared briefly in the last video that I recorded when I analyzed some of the business ideas. That's where I kind of like created this technique. And a couple of people really said that they liked it, so I decided to take a deeper dive on it and explain it a little bit further, show you some more examples. But this slice and dice technique will really help you find your own target market. So, for example, if you're thinking of starting a business and you want to become, you want to teach fitness online, it's very difficult to find a profitable niche where there is a gap in the market, which means that there's not enough content. And there's too much demand, and that's the gap in the market. Again, you can watch my video from a few days ago on finding a profitable business idea if you want to learn about that concept. But if there's no gap in the market, then your business is not going to take off. So when you're entering a more saturated market where there's already a lot of competitors, you can still make things work, but you do have to find that audience that's underserved, that has a problem that nobody's solving for them. That really has to happen. And the way that you can do that is through the, this slice and dice exercise that I'll show you today, and that I'll walk you through examples. And then finally, I'm going to share with you a very simple framework that will help you choose the right target audience. So maybe if you come up with a couple of the different target audiences, I will show you how you can test those target audience and then choose the one that is right for you, and then how you can build your business around that. So we're gonna talk about all of these different things, and without further ado, I just want to dive into the video. So first of all, let's talk about the conventional advice when it comes to defining your target audience. And if you Google this subject, you'll find something like this. People will say like, hey, you can define your target audience. It's very simple. So this is the person from your target audience, and basically you want to figure out, okay, what is their age, what is their location, where do they live, What is their occupation? What do they do? What are their hobbies and interests? What is their education? What language do they speak? What gender are they? And then you're supposed to basically make these things up based on no real data. You're just supposed to find this, decide on this somehow, and then you all of a sudden have a profitable online business. That's apparently how it works. That's what all of the articles would have you believe. Now, if you're watching this video, you might have tried that before and you see that it actually creates more problems than solutions. Because let's say I actually use this framework and even tried it for this current business idea. Or for example, even for these videos that I'm creating, which I believe are filling a gap in the market. And it seems that they are, because people really seem to like them, and they share them and they comment on them and they send me emails about how much they like them. But let's say if I try to create these videos based on this, language, okay, well, I guess most people are English speaking, but they can have any possible language. Gender, both male, female, does it matter? Not really. I wouldn't deliver this drastically differently if it was a male or a female audience. I wouldn't really change much, or I wouldn't want to change much, because it wouldn't really help me validate my idea in any way. Age, does it really matter if you're 20 years old or 60 or 50 or 40 or 30 or 18 or 87? Not really. The advice can apply to everybody. And even if I said hey, I'm gonna create these videos for people who are let's say more elderly, yes, that might make a difference, but again, I need some kind of information that this is the reason why I should be creating this. I shouldn't just make this up. There should be some kind of information telling me to do that. Education doesn't really matter. Some of my clients have gone to Harvard, some of my clients do not have a formal education. I haven't noticed any sort of a trend, I haven't noticed that helped me, that I ever used that in my online business in any way. It just hasn't served me well, and I find it mostly irrelevant. For example, does it really matter if you teach somebody how to play bass guitar if they are, if they have a master's or a PhD or a college degree? Doesn't really matter. If they want to learn bass guitar, none of that really matters all that much. Hobbies, are your hobbies important to me when I'm teaching you about online business? I mean, maybe I want you to be, excited about learning and things like that, but it doesn't matter if you're into skiing or into rock climbing or into poetry. None of that really matters. It's largely irrelevant when it comes to me, teaching you about business. Occupation, it doesn't matter if you're a lawyer or if you're a doctor or if you're something like that. If you're trying to create your own online business, or if that's what you used to do before you started your business, I'm not going to target a specific audience here. I could sometimes, but I don't need to define this for this specific idea, because there's another different gap in the market, and these things are largely irrelevant, because right now I feel there's no really deep content online for showing you how to build your own online business, and that's the gap. And all of these things, they're not that relevant to that. They might be relevant to another thing, to another business idea, but to my business they're not relevant. And then location, also to my business, largely relevant. To some people it's important, but largely relevant. And you will find every time I get a new coaching client, or somebody writes to me and they want my help, typically I see something like this, because they've taken some kind of an online business course and they tell them you have to get the demographics right, this is how you define your target audience. And then they say something like this: okay, so I want to teach guitar to people who are between 25 and 37 years old, and then they are single, they don't have kids, they have gone to high school and they have gone to university. I'm why does all this matter? None of this is gonna make a great or a horrible business idea. It's completely irrelevant to you teaching guitar. Maybe certain aspects are relevant. For example, if you say I'm gonna teach guitar in the German market because nobody's doing it, but then that's the aspect that's relevant. And yes, you will be able to find some demographics once you study who your readers are and who your paying clients are. But before you actually have your readers and paying clients, you'd just be guessing. and then this information wouldn't really help you in any way. Like, the problem with this approach, there's three different problems. One is just doesn't work. Like, even if I say, oh, I just want to find these doctors that are between like 27 and 38 years old and they're single. Like, how do you go and find those people? How is that helpful to you? Because then the next step is go and find and talk to these people and see if they, if they want your help. Like, how do you find those people? It's difficult because you've made up this imaginary audience in your head and you used all of this criteria to qualify them, and they're not really useful to you. It doesn't make it any easier for you to find them. In some cases, it's easier because you say like, okay, anyone that wants to learn guitar that lives in Slovenia, but then all the other 7 criteria are pretty much useless for that situation. So it doesn't really work. It makes it hard to find people. Also, what I found is that doing this kind of an analysis, or like it's not even an analysis, it's just guesswork, because again, you don't have the data, you don't have readers, you don't have clients. Like, doing this kind of an analysis is largely unnecessary. Okay, totally butchered that. Unnecessary. Okay, unnecessary. When it comes to building an online business, yes, it can be important maybe a year down the line or like a few months when you've got like your first 10 clients and then you want to see what your 2 best clients have in common and you want to attract more clients like that. Like, that's actually something that one of my friends, Peter Nugent, did when he, repositioned his business, The Essential Man, because he realized that his products were bought by both college students who wanted to buy cheap clothes and affordable clothes in Uniqlo, as well as, people who were CEOs of tech companies that were willing, to pay him a lot more than those students. And then we decided, hey, let's just focus on that audience because it seems like it's a much better audience. That's when you will do something like that. That's when you'll do that kind of analysis. And even then, it doesn't matter, what language they speak, as long as they speak English for him. It doesn't matter, he's targeting men, so I guess that matters. But it doesn't matter if they're like 35 or 47. It doesn't really matter what their education is. It doesn't really matter what their hobbies are. It's not the key thing in his business. There's just one qualifier that's really, really important because there's where the gap in the market is, which for him, it would be the people in the tech industry. But really, like, a lot of these qualifiers are just unnecessary, especially at an early stage when you don't even have that data yet. And then finally, it's just not useful. If you define your target audience and you say they're like 35 to 47 years old and they're single and they have a college degree and they really like skiing, and then you're teaching them how to, let's say, stay fit while working out at home, like, first of all, a lot of this information is, again, completely unnecessary, not helpful at all in finding the gap in the market, not helpful with positioning yourself. But it's also not useful because you're not going to use that in your copy, because not everybody's going to have a hobby as skiing. And like, you're not going to use this on your website. You're not going to say like, hey, this is a website for 25 to 37-year-old people. Like, you're not going to say that. You're not going to write any differently. Like, yes, you will have a certain audience in mind and you're going to develop that picture over time. But especially when you're in the early stages of building your business, you don't need any of this stuff. Like, I don't know how they came up with this. Like, probably somebody said like, oh, this is what they taught us in school and this is how you should do things. And maybe that's how they used to do things and maybe that's the theory. But practice, I've seen, is very, very, very different. So how's practice different? What you need to do instead is one of the 2 things. And we've covered that, in some of the previous videos. So if you do want to go deeper on these topics, do look at my videos on finding and validating your business ideas that you'll find on my channel. But basically, you want to find an audience or a problem. So you want to find an audience that's not being served, So that might mean that, let's say, I run a fitness, like I run an in-person gym, and I have a lot of, clients, but I don't have email marketing set up, and I can't find anyone in Slovenia to, write copy for me. That means that there's a gap in the market, and then, like, if you're a freelance copywriter from Slovenia, that's a gap that you can fill. Or you want there to be a problem that's not solved. So for example, let's say I want to learn about ice climbing and there's no teachers around, and I want to learn how to, do some ice climbing by myself or with a friend of mine. I want to buy an online course on this subject. So I have that problem. I want to learn how to get good at ice climbing, but I can't find any books. I can't really find any resources that would be really in depth, that would be really, really good. That means that there's a gap in the market. So it all comes down to this. Like, there has to be a gap between content and demand. There has to be this gap, and you with your business idea, you are going to fill that gap up. You're going to fill that gap up. And that's where you will see a lot of traction. That's where you will see people want to hire you. That's when you see that when you publish a video on YouTube, a lot of people want to watch it and share it. That's what happens when you're having a gap in the market. When you don't, like, even if you have all of these different customer demographics, it doesn't help you, because if there's no gap in the market, you're going to write a lot of content, you're going to try to get clients, and you're just going to hear crickets and things aren't going to work out. And this will definitely not save you, like defining your target audience this way. But if you define your target audience in a way that you find a gap in the market, so let's imagine that this is the market and that you find this little gap, because people are talking about all of these things and they're talking about all of these problems and solving all of these audiences, but there's this gap that nobody is solving. Then, like, if you turn that into your business, if you fill that gap, then you're going to have a profitable online business. And that's what we're going to keep in mind today as I walk you through, a couple of different ideas and how you can actually apply them to finding your target audience. But for now, I want to just give you some ideas of how I would actually define a target audience. And it's, again, much, much simpler. You don't need 17 different qualifiers. You just need whatever is relevant. So here's one idea. Burnout for programmers. So there's a lot of programmers out there that struggle with burnout, but there's no solutions out there. I've done the research, I've looked at that online. There's a lot of people. There's a Reddit thread with like 200 engaged comments, people asking questions, no really good advice. When you Google it, there's no really good solutions. There's definitely a niche there, and I know somebody who's going to pursue that niche. But that's a good niche, and notice how simple it is. Like, he defines a problem and he merges it with a specific audience, problem and audience, burnout for programmers. And that, in that case, that's specific enough because there's a gap and nobody's filling that gap. Next, productivity plus an audience of your choice. So for me, it was online poker players. Again, problem and audience. That's how I actually built my first profitable online business. I wrote an online guide that over 200,000 people read. I've, created online videos that literally millions of people watched. I've had coaching clients that helped me, stop working at my full-time job and really just focus on building my own business and doing what I love. And then eventually I built this business out of it. But it was deceptively simple. It was productivity and poker players. Like, that's the audience, and you could say online poker players. And that's how I started. Then later on, yes, I tweaked my audience a little bit. I focused on more successful online poker players, but it doesn't matter what hobbies they have. It doesn't matter if they were male or female, even though they were predominantly male. It doesn't matter how old they were, like, as long as they were, of legal age to play poker online. A lot of this criteria just doesn't matter, but what it matters is that there was a gap in the market because a lot of people were teaching productivity, and there's this poker player audience and nobody was serving these people. So I came in there and served them, and they were really, really happy. Next example would be, even like if we stay with this example, there was another person in the industry that started around my time when I did that. That was like 8 years ago. But he taught mental game to poker players because he used to be a psychology coach for golfers, and then he met a poker player, and then he decided to say like, oh, like a lot of online poker players, they struggle with their mental game and they let their emotions get in the way, and that's why they lose a lot of money. Like, I can help them with that. So he decided to build a whole business around that. Like, he has even books about mental game of poker and so on and so on. So he just switched to different problems, same audience, there was a gap in the market and it worked out. And again, the audience is very, very simple. Next example. So scientific. This one is a bit more complex. Scientific approach plus intermittent fasting plus German market. So this is interesting, right? This is an idea that one of my clients is working on, and she's building a business around this. But when you have a market that's, let's say, a very big market, and then you go for what I'll call the slice and dice technique, which is what I'll show you later on in the video. As you go through this technique, you will basically slice and dice this market into a number of different ways. And let's imagine that this is the German audience for something like intermittent fasting. So this is where you have like the problem, you have the audience, and let's say you try to explore this niche and you feel like it's still very, very saturated, like there's a lot of competitors. So what can you do then? Well, if the market is big enough, you can slice and dice it further. And you can take a slice, essentially, of that slice that might be somewhere here, right? And then, the way that you do that is by adding a specific, I call it like by adding a specific angle. And this is an advanced example because I would not recommend most people do this when starting out. But if you, practice finding ideas and validating them and finding the right target audience, like you will notice in some cases, like there is an opportunity to go even more deep, even more specific. And this is where you can really have some kind of an angle, which is again something that I talked about in my previous, videos on finding profitable business ideas. But there can be a scientific approach to intermittent fasting for a German audience, and that can be a great business idea. But again, like the audience really is as simple as this. So the, German speaking people, so they're probably going to live in, let's say, Germany or Austria or maybe Switzerland. And, what they will have in common is that they will prefer this data-driven approach, this scientifically driven approach, rather than just some people making things up without any research or data to back it up. So that's going to be, let's say a fraction of the German market will be interested in that. And that's how you can see like, okay, that's an audience that I can serve well. And again, this is a bit more complex with the angle, but I did want to share one advanced example as well. Next example, let's keep this one a little bit simpler, is home workouts, something that right now a lot of people are interested in. And something that a lot of businesses talk about. So that's the problem. But what if there was an audience, let's say the Dutch people in the Netherlands, there's nobody really teaching people how to do this. And a lot of people are searching for it online and they're not finding solutions. Well, then you could come in and provide those solutions for people. So again, very simple. So Dutch audience, people from the Dutch audience who want to work out from home. It doesn't matter if they're a doctor, doesn't matter what their hobbies are. It's just this intersection, it's just this gap in the market that nobody would be filling. And then one final example, let's say personal style plus people in tech. So that's the example from my friend Peter from Essential Man. He started out with just teaching personal style to ambitious men, and then over time, after a couple of years, like we had this conversation about, and we took a deep look at his audience, and we realized that most of the people that were his best clients were actually the people who were in tech rather than just students. Like tech startup CEOs were much better clients for him. So he was able to build a whole business around that, and he really changed the way that he creates content and copy and so on, because this is where it actually makes a difference. Some of those qualifiers don't make a difference in how you run your business, but this does. Because if you're writing content for somebody that just wants affordable, cheap clothes, you're going to write the article about top 5, affordable leather jackets you can buy for less than $100. But then if you're going to target a more premium audience, you might say like, a leather jacket you can actually take to work as a startup CEO, or 10 of the absolute best leather jackets you can buy today, because they don't want affordable stuff. They want the best of the best. they want maybe things that they can wear in the office without sweating, and so on and so on. So they have drastically different problems, desires, the language they use to describe them, things that are important to them. And, this is when it actually makes sense. But then again, it doesn't matter what their hobbies are. It doesn't really matter how old they are. A lot of these qualifiers just don't matter. But describing an audience by something simple that they can say, yes, I'm in this audience, and then writing for that audience, that's what's really, really important. Essentially, when you describe your target audience, somebody should be very quickly, after just a few words, be able to say if they're part of the target audience. So for example, if you're a lawyer who's burned out, that's a clear enough target audience. If you're a programmer who's burnt out, that's a clear enough target audience. You don't need to go more specific than that in most cases, but you do have to go specific enough that there is a gap in the market. So that's how I think about things. And I found this framework to be a lot more useful than going and, going over all the possible target demographics, because again, when you don't even have the data behind it, you could just spend months collecting the data, or you could actually test your idea and see if there's a gap in the market, and that's going to be much more effective and a lot faster. Okay. Now, when it comes to different markets and different target audiences, this is how essentially the things work. So if we expand on this idea of the gap in the market, here's how it works, right? You will have demand, and then you will have, let's say, the amount of content, or I'll call it competition in this example. Competition. Okay, so competition. And then this is going to be high demand, or low. And the reason why I'm drawing this is so you can actually know when to use the technique that I'm going to share with you in a second, to slice and dice markets, and when it's actually not necessary to do it. So once you start looking at the market, and you could do something like the Google test to just start doing things, that's the strategy that I shared with you in the validation video on validating your business ideas. Once you start doing that, you're going to notice a couple of things. Like some ideas, they're just going to have very low demand. So nobody's really searching for that. Nobody's really looking for that. And there's going to be no competition. So it might just be something that people really don't care about. And even though you think it's kind of cool, it's just something that people don't seem to care about. So that's going to be a bad idea. You're not going to pursue it. Then, you might find that there is something that isn't a great idea, that there isn't a lot of demand for, and there is actually a lot of competition for. So let's say a lot of people are talking about things what would be a good example? Let's say things like habits and goals, and you would think that there's a high demand for that, and yes, some people are Googling that, but there's a lot more people that are, in the productivity space than there are people looking for help with this topic. Or maybe this isn't the best example, because there are some people that are, again, looking for help like this. But then again, let's think of another example that would be actually more relevant, because I'm not loving that one. Let's see. So if there was high competition and low demand, let's say a lot of people are talking about a certain topic that's just really, really important. Even let's say coronavirus, a lot of people are talking about that right now. People aren't really looking to pay to solve that problem. Even though it's popular, there's no business idea there. This isn't people aren't looking to pay for, to educate themselves on the coronavirus. Most likely you would have to test this, but again, you find this information with testing. But if you see that there's a topic that nobody really seems to care about that much, and then a lot of people just write about it. So how you will find this is when you start doing the Google test, it's going to be low search volume, and there's going to be a lot of content. So when there's a lot of content about a specific search term, there's a lot of articles and things like that, but there's very low search, that means that this is the idea is in this quadrant of the market, and it's just not a good market for you to pursue, because again, there's no demand and there's a lot of competition. So there's no gap there. It's very, very saturated. So this would typically be a very oversaturated market. Okay. Then you will have an example where you just have a saturated market, and that might look something like this. So this would be the saturated market. So think about things like building an online business, or productivity would actually be a better fit for something like this, or weight loss, or fitness, or things like that, right? Or the makeup industry or something like that. Like, these are markets where there's a lot of demand. People are constantly looking for help with something like this. But then there's also a lot of competitors. So, every time you decide to start an online business, you're competing with all of these people, and I could probably fill my whole iPad and like 10 pages of this. Like, this is how many competitors you have. So if you go and teach business fitness online, or just business online nowadays, it's going to be very difficult for you to succeed unless you have found an area that is right here that has low competition and high demand. And this is where your gap in the market is. And this is, the profitable market that you do want to find. And this is, like, some people would call this the niche. Sometimes to create that niche is just focusing on a specific target audience. And how you can do that, how you can usually find this kind of a market, is you can find a portion of the saturated market that has high demand but little competition. So let's say there's a lot of competition for learning programming online worldwide, but then nobody's teaching it in Slovenian language. That might be an aspect of this market, and then I could teach it in Slovenia. And then again, I would create this kind of a market where there is a lot of demand and low competition. So essentially what you're trying to do is, if you're finding, like, it's going to be one of the two cases. Scenario number one is going to be that, right off the bat, when you start doing your research, you're just teaching something, let's say, fairly obscure, or something that just, like, you feel like already should be out there but nobody has created. Like, in that case, you probably don't even need a huge target audience. But let's say something like teaching people how to find a job in international development. That's what one of my past clients, Michelle, worked on. That was a market where just nobody was, like, a lot of people had questions. Like, there were Facebook groups of like tens of thousands of people who had questions about that topic. Like, hey, how do you find a job here, there? What does it take to find a job? And so on and so on. And nobody was really teaching it. Like, you will just stumble upon a market like that, and it's typically going to be a gold mine and a great way for you to really contribute and solve a lot of people's problems. Oftentimes you will stumble upon a market like that. Oftentimes, though, a market like that is going to be hidden in this saturated market. So the second approach is find a saturated market which might be in line with the skills that you have, with things that you're excited about, but you're thinking, okay, I want to do this, but there's so many competitors. Like, how can I find my own niche? How can I find my own target audience? And that's where you really implement the slice and dice technique, which I'll show you how to use today on a couple of different examples. And that's how you can find a market like this, and then test it to see if there is enough traction, if there is indeed a gap in the market. So that's where you prove your assumptions. And then if there is, that's when you can very confidently spend more time and energy on your business idea, just knowing that it's much more likely that it will work out, that you'll get a lot of traction, a lot of clients, that people really want this, and so on and so on. And that's exactly what I'm going to teach you in the rest of this video through different examples as well. Okay, so how does this slice and dice technique work? If you're hearing about it for the first time, essentially this is the market, and then this is your amazing knife that you're gonna use, and you're gonna attack this market from all the different angles, and you're gonna slice it like a big juicy watermelon. You're just gonna slice it in a million different ways. And then you're gonna come up with this amazing, delicious watermelon chunks, or watermelon cubes or dices, however you decide to slice it and dice it. Yeah, so I had to have some fun with this. But basically, that's essentially how you're approaching a saturated market. You're slicing it, you're dicing it, and then what you're trying to find out is these cubes or these slices that are just really, really good, that are filling a gap in the market. They're really nice and really juicy, and they're just waiting for you to to go in and talk about them and help people with them, and so on and so on. So you want to find this, and these are like these are the candidates for finding your target audience. Because typically, as you do this analysis that I'll show you in a second how to do it, you will find multiple options, multiple ideas, and they will seem like great options, but then you also have to test them. So as you go through this process, you'll come up with a lot of different options, and then you will do some kind of a test that I'll show you in the future how to do. You will go through a test and you will narrow down, because you might come up with like 50 or 100 of these cubes. You will use the process that I tell you to filter through this and pick out the ones that are the best. And then you're going to come up with, let's say, 3 or 5, however many you want to choose, candidates for your target audience. You're going to have a couple of profitable market candidates. So you're going to come up with these candidates. As you narrow down the options, you're going to come up with a few of this, and then you'll take these candidates and then you will test them. And then once you test them, you will choose one of them to continue with it. Or, if you don't find any traction along the way, then you will go back and choose a couple of other candidates, or maybe just try slicing a different market altogether and work on a different idea. And then when you find, a market that's just right, that's ready, that wants to learn from you, that's when you just go all out on it, and then, move forward from these stages of like finding your business idea and idea validation, and you go into research, and then you go and create some content so that you can actually build a business out of this. For this step, which is kind of like the third step, because this is the fourth step. This is the second step, is just narrowing down, and then the first step is actually slicing and dicing the market. But for this step, watch the video that I already created about business idea validation, because it's gonna show you how to go through this process step by step in a proven way that actually works, that actually helps you honestly see if your idea is good or not. And you can just repeat some of the paths from this process to find your ideal target audience. Okay, so that's how the process works on a very, very high level. Now, I know that, examples are a different thing and practice is a different thing than theory. And I don't like that a lot of people in the online business space just teach theory and ideas that aren't really proven, that aren't really what they did to build their businesses. So I like making these masterclasses a lot about practical examples. And today I'm gonna walk you through 3 different examples of slicing and dicing. And this is important to you because even if you know the framework, there's still a lot of value in you seeing how to implement it. And I would actually challenge you, as you're watching this video, for every one of the markets that I share with you, it's going to be 3 different markets, or 3 different topics, or 3 different audiences. For every one of them, I challenge you to pause the video and you think about how you would slice and dice the market. And sometimes it might be tough, especially if you're not familiar with the idea, but do this just as a mental exercise. You can also write it down if you want to, but just as a mental exercise. Pause the video and think about how would I slice and dice this market based on the information that you have about this market. For some of them, you might not have as much information, but really try to challenge yourself. And then what I really recommend you to do at the end of this video is to slice and dice your own market so that you can find ideas for your own online business as well. Okay, so let's look at the examples. So example number 1. I'm going to use the examples that I'm fairly familiar with so I can show you, because the ideas that you have for your online business, there should be a decent amount of understanding you have about them, because you will be the expert in that area. So it's not going to be like, oh, what can I even teach? You're going to have a lot of ideas of what you can teach, and a lot of different things that go into, a certain result, whether that's programming or teaching guitar or something like that. But I hope that these examples that I show you will show you how I think about this and how you can really see patterns and trends and how you can slice and dice your own market as well. But the markets that I chose, they're ones that are close to me, so I know enough about them to be able to give you a fairly decent analysis. So first example, let's do it. Okay, let's build some suspense first. First example, can you guess what it's gonna be? Who is this guy? What is he doing? Well, he actually has biggest weight about his shoulder. So it's gonna be weightlifting, as you might have guessed. So this is the first example of weightlifting. So that's something that I did for a long time. I competed as an athlete. I won multiple national championships in powerlifting. So that's a topic I know quite a lot about. Not something I want to build a business about, but if I wanted to, then this is how I would think about it. So how can I slice and dice this big market? Like, let's say that this is the market. How can I slice and dice it in many different ways? Well, weightlifting. First of all, one of the things I always think about is nationality and language. For anything that I'm going to talk about, like any idea that I talk about, if you're not living in the States or in an English-speaking country, then there's a chance that you could do something locally. There's a chance that you could do something just within your own country, and there's a chance that there's a fairly big probability that your niche is going to be much more lucrative or much better if you focus just on your own country and nationality, because by definition there are typically going to be a lot less competitors in the online space. So that's one thing that I always consider. But then I consider a lot of other things as well. So first of all, I could call them disciplines. So strongman, those are the people that lift heavy weights. Strong men or strong women. Then Olympic weightlifting. So strongmen are basically the guys that lift super heavy stones that you might have seen on TV. Olympic weightlifting, that's the type of weightlifting that you see on Olympic Games, where kind of like this guy where people put things above their head. I could even focus on CrossFit, because those guys lift a lot of weights as well. So that's like, this guy's just running around and challenging themselves and doing all these crazy things like that combines like, swimming and lifting weights and running with, heavy weight vests on them and doing pull-ups and things like that. I could focus on that, or I could even focus on powerlifting, which is what I actually did. So that's another interesting option. Like I could, choose to focus on one of this. Let's say I was really good in a specific aspect of powerlifting. I could even teach, people from different audiences, like how to master some of the things, because maybe they don't have enough knowledge about this. And then I could even break this down further into equipped and raw. So this is, if you're not into weightlifting, this is basically equipped powerlifting is something where you can wear some kind of a suit that supports you and helps you lift more weight. Whereas, with something like raw powerlifting, we call it, you're not really allowed to use things like to put things on your body, to, put a suit on, or to use some kind of like sleeves that help you lift more weight. You're technically not allowed to do that. So you're not using any of this, ultra supportive equipment that helps you lift, let's say, twice as much as otherwise. So I could even break it down, because like these are two very distinct disciplines. And maybe there's a gap in the market in one, but there isn't in the other. Like maybe there's not many online programs for equipped powerlifting, but there's a lot of them for raw powerlifting or something like that. So I would look at all of these ways. I would start slicing and dicing the market this way. Another way in which I would slice it is just by disciplines. So even for something like powerlifting, like the specific disciplines within this would be squat. So that means like you put a lot of your weights on your shoulders and you squat with it, or deadlift, which basically means you load up a barbell with a lot of weights and you lift it from the ground, like you would lift a dead body off the ground. That's how they call it. Or bench press, which is the thing that, a lot of guys do in the gym. They like to lay on this bench and lift a lot of weights. And, that's another thing that like also we used to compete in as powerlifters. And then also there's a small aspect of that here of bench only. So there, like typically when you compete in powerlifting, you would compete in all three of these disciplines, but sometimes you can just compete in two of them. Like there's a thing, it's called push and pull, where you basically just do deadlift and bench press. or maybe you just bench only, which is also like one of the disciplines, like you can just compete in bench press. So there's a lot of different combinations as well. And there's somewhere here might already be a niche that's not being tapped into. I actually do know that, like, for example, I tried to find training program online for bench only powerlifting, and I just couldn't find it, no matter how much I Googled. Like, I just couldn't find anything even related to it. So there's definitely a gap in the market there. Like, if you're really good at bench pressing and you know how to train people, how to, train their bench press only, there's a big gap in the market there. Like, there's just really no good paid content, no good free content. There's a gap already. And if you went and researched some of these things, like, you would probably already find more gaps in there. And then you could slice and dice each of this, like, through, Olympic weightlifting. You have like the snatch, and then you have a clean and jerk. And then strongman also has a bunch of different disciplines. CrossFit has a bunch of different disciplines. You could slice and dice this further and further and further. Like, there's a lot of things that are in here that I'm not going to cover, but I just want to give you some ideas of how you can start slicing and dicing your market. And then I'll actually also show you after these first exercises, like how much you should actually do this, like how specific, how niche you should go. So I'll show you how to do that as well. So don't worry if you think like it's too specific. I'll show you exactly how to know for sure if it's too broad or too specific or something like that, and what to pay attention to. Okay. Then I could focus on different problems that people have. So this is where it gets really interesting, because we can slice and dice this in almost an infinite number of ways. Training plans. Some people want training plans. Like, basically tell me like, well, how much should I squat? How much should I deadlift? How many reps should I have? For how long should I do it? How many times a week? Training plans. Nutrition. Performance-based nutrition, nutrition for weight loss, nutrition for building muscle, nutrition plans. There's a lot of things there. Water cutting. So this is something that I mentioned in one of the previous videos, but essentially, when you compete on a high level, what you typically will do is you might weigh like something like 95 kilos, and then you might want to compete in like the 93 kilo weight class. So the week before, you will strategically get some water out of your body and dehydrate yourself, and then weigh in and make your category, and then eat a lot of food and drink a lot of Gatorade to get back on your target weight so you can perform as best as possible. So there's, a big thing to explore just there. And I also haven't really seen anyone do like a paid thing on this or a high quality thing. It's just like, I feel like there's definitely a gap in the market there. Competition prep. So just like how to prepare for a competition. It's called peaking in the weightlifting world. Like, there's a lot of things that you could do about that. Then you have building muscle. So again, building muscle for CrossFitters, for powerlifters, for strongmen. That's where you're already getting really specific, and there's probably some gaps in the market there. Same could be said for losing fat. Or moving up or down a weight class. So for example, let's say you're really, really strong, but in order to hit some kind of a world record, you would have to lose 7 kilos, but you want to do that without sacrificing all the strength. Then you would probably hire somebody to help you lose the weight while maintaining the strength. And, you would probably have a question, well, what should I eat? How should I train? And so on and so on. So there might be something there. There might be also something there with breathing or bracing. Because if you don't know how to breathe properly, then your form will deteriorate on really heavy weights, and you just might not be able to lift them properly, and your form will deteriorate, and then you will miss the lifts, which is not good if you train 6 months, or 5 years for this competition, and then you mess up. Even mindset, because a lot of people just crumble under pressure during the competitions. So you could also talk about that if there was a gap in the market. So there's a lot of stuff there, right? Then you can even look at the model. So this is a little bit, it's kind of in line with like choosing your target audience, because some people will be looking for specific things. And what I mean by model is something like you could offer Skype coaching. let's say one-on-one, or technique reviews. So maybe, you want somebody to review your squat and bench videos on a weekly basis and tell you how to improve them. Programming. So this means that, for example, you have a competition in 6 months and you want somebody to create a training plan for you over those next 6 months. Could also be just email coaching. I know a company that does a lot of email coaching for accountability with people in the just weight loss space. And that seems to be working really well. In-person coaching. So maybe, you live in a country like Slovenia and it's hard to find a powerlifting coach that will actually give you feedback in person on some of your lifts and help you improve them. Maybe there's a gap in the market there. Or online or in-person workshops. Maybe some people are looking for that, they're looking for an online class or on powerlifting with that teaches them the basics of how to get into it, or they're looking for an in-person workshop or something like that. These are all the kind of things that I would be looking at as I'm trying to find that gap in the market. And you might think wow, you're really slicing and dicing this hard, but trust me, there's more stuff that you can actually do. So let's go on the other side. Let's actually touch on age. Age, for most people, it won't be that relevant, but in certain cases it can be. Let's say you focus on targeting high school kids because that's when you typically start getting into, weightlifting. And if you have a weightlifting school or club, then it's going to be a good idea for you to, even talk about things like when is it a good time to start doing it. You will want to, get some athletes from schools so they can become really, really good by starting really, really young, and so on and so on. So maybe, riding for teenagers, weightlifting for teenagers could be interesting because maybe there are certain considerations. Maybe it's different for them because they have a lot more testosterone, they're growing a lot more rapidly. So the problems that they have are going to be different than from adults. Maybe you want to focus on serving retired athletes who have competed for a long time. They want to stay strong, but they just don't want to keep injuring themselves. Maybe you could even target seniors specifically, because a lot of people do compete in weightlifting as seniors when they're 40, 50, 60, 70 years old. I don't know what the exact age range is when the seniors start, but there's definitely a lot of demand for that as well, because there's some kind of people in all the countries. There's some people who are a little bit older, and they again they have different questions how we can do certain lifts safely and so on and how do I train. So you could target that specific audience if that's what you have experience in. A completely random way to test this, to slice and dice this market, focus on Paralympic powerlifting. So if you're a Paralympic athlete, they're actually at Paralympic Games, you have powerlifting, and you could teach people how to lift really well from this target audience, because there's a lot of people competing in that. And then there's all the other ways in which you could slice and dice this market. So this could be powerlifting gear, or even strongman gear. And what I mean by that is certain sleeves and suits and all the different lifting belts. There's a lot of different stuff here. You could talk about that, what's the best, what's the worst. You could review it, and so on and so on. That might be an idea. And again, you could always combine it with something like that, for Slovenians, because maybe nobody's really talking about that in Slovenia, even though people are talking about that in the US. Competition software. So there's actually very sophisticated software that people use to, keep track of all the results during this weightlifting competitions and to display them on screen and to stream things online. And it's a paid software. So somebody's earning money off that. They found a niche and they, successfully filled it. Then you could also be talking about, let's say, gym equipment. What are the best bench presses, squat racks to buy? Or you could also focus just on home gyms to talk about that. You could talk about hosting a competition. Because like to organize and host a powerlifting competition, if you wanted to do that or start your own federation, like or something like that, like that's a lot of work, and maybe the target audience isn't massive for that, but there are some people who are looking to do that, and maybe you could teach them how to do that. Even judging, for example, like judging is a thing that you could teach people about, that maybe a lot of people want to become, judges at this kind of competitions, and so on and so on. And this really, everything I just shared applies to any sport on the planet. Like any sport audience you want to serve, you can go through this exact process. You can look at different problems that people have, different models, just random things that come up, like different age groups in some cases are going to be relevant. Always look at your country as well, look at all the different disciplines, and then the specific skills and techniques within those disciplines. These things are going to keep repeating themselves over and over again in any sports that you touch. So a lot of this you can just steal and you can apply to your own, slicing and dicing just to get you ideas. But this is how to slice and dice a market like this. And then I'm thinking, oh my God, like there's a lot of stuff, and we need to narrow this down, because right now it's very difficult to actually work for all of this, because there's just like a lot of information. So what you're going to do is, as step 2, narrow down. So ideally you want to come up with like 3 to 5 markets that you want to test. Something like 3 is probably going to be a good number. It can be less, it can be more. This is just a guideline. This is not, set in stone. But the way that you narrow things down is through a couple of specific ways. So one, you think about the financial situation. So this means that, do people have the sorry, one sec. There's actually more ways. I'm just looking at my notes. There's actually more ways in which you can filter for this. But basically, with the financial situation, the question is, do they have the money? So this is an example when something like, selling style coaching to, college kids, something like kind of like what Peter from Essential Man tried to do, initially, that would not be the best idea. But if you're selling it to people who actually have the money, then that's a much better idea. And then you can also ask yourself, are they happy to pay for this? And that's what you'll figure out when you're validating your idea and when you're trying to get your first clients. You can kind of like gauge that response when you offer something to people. Are they like, done, I'm in? Or they're like, I don't really want, it's not the right time, I don't have the money. Like, even though they have the money, like people should be happy to pay. And this is something that, initially you'll guesstimate. So you kind of make an educated guess. You will just try to mentally go through this exercise, and then you will, go and test your assumptions. And as you do that, like you will be able to actually see if people are willing and able to pay for the things that you want to offer to them. But that's one thing. So for example, if you go over certain audiences that you came in mind and you're like, oh, I don't really think that's a good audience, I would still say oftentimes you want to test your assumptions, because I have seen a lot of people come up with false negatives when they just assume nobody's going to be able to pay. Like I've covered some of those examples in my last video on, is my idea good or not? Definitely recommend you look at that video, because I go into a lot more context on that, on why you should always test these assumptions rather than just making them the ultimate truth. And then also, like, a lot of people have false misconceptions, like saying like, oh, I could only sell a, $100 online course or something like that. And I'm not sure that's a great idea. I'm not sure there's enough people, but then you could actually build a really solid business out of it. But people just get stuck in their head. So don't get stuck in your head. Make an estimation to help you filter down the ideas, and then always make sure that you actually test your assumptions as well. But that's one of the ways that you will be filtering out ideas. Other ways, expertise. So if you're not an expert, you can narrow down ideas, that you're not an expert in, and then maybe later in the future when you are an expert at them, you can return back to them. So for example, I really don't have experience with equipped powerlifting, so I would never teach something like that. I also don't have experience with Olympic weightlifting and strongman and CrossFit, so I probably would just filter all of these things out. Yes, maybe in the future I would want to help some of these people, and there is the example, like, the mental game of poker that I talked about earlier, where you take a specific skill from one industry and bring it to the other, but then you have to learn a lot about, the specific audience. It is possible. And then even in this case, I wouldn't be teaching Olympic weightlifting. I would be teaching powerlifting, which is, what I do have experience in. I would be teaching this to a specific audience. I wouldn't want to learn about these things just to build a business around it. I would be applying the principles to this audience. But in general, if you don't really have expertise in a certain topic, if you're not really excited about it, if you don't have expertise, I would not pursue that audience. I would rather pursue one that, have problems that you do know how to solve and you do have solutions that are proven to work. Then you just have the overall excitement. Some people will be really excited about, let's say, talking about powerlifting gear and equipment. I might not be, or about competition software. So that way, I can very easily, let's say, cut out all of these ideas. I can save them for later, but right now, this is not what I'll be testing because these things just don't excite me. The idea that you talk about, it should be an intersection of expertise, excitement, and demand. And basically, these first two, the expertise and excitement, you can test by yourself to see what's here. You can just ask yourself, am I good enough at this or not? And can I get people results reliably? But then you have to test the demand as well to find these things that are like great ideas. They're like the intersection of all of these things. And this is the exact same principle we're using here to filter down your ideas after you go and slice the dice and market. Definitely eliminate any ideas that you're just not excited about. So again, if I look at this and I'm thinking, well, okay, I'm not that excited about, let's say, helping retired athletes. So I'm not gonna focus on that as much. And then the next filter would be relatability. So this means how well people can relate to you. And again, sometimes you can work around this. Like, for example, there's great gymnastic coaches that have never done gymnastics. There's the mental game of poker example. But it does make things easier. Like, if you are going to teach meditation to lawyers, that you are a lawyer, just makes things a lot easier because you just understand your audience better. So initially, I would start cutting out the audiences that you cannot relate to as well, and just focus on the ones that you can relate to a lot better. So here I might actually go and cut out seniors because I really feel like I cannot relate to them. I don't understand their problems well enough. And I might also cut out high school kids because I did not do this, when I was in high school, and maybe I would revisit that in the future, but I wouldn't actually know what their problems are like. I don't think they would be able to relate to me that much as well. So it would be possible for somebody that's really excited, somebody that has a lot of experience with working with kids like that. So they do have some sort of relatability because they can say like, oh yeah, I've already helped people with this. Like, I've already coached a lot of kids in my, school. That's when you can pursue that. And then the one final filter that I have for you is your network. So just how many people you already know. So I know a lot of powerlifters, but I don't know a lot of people in strongman and CrossFit and Olympic weightlifting. So I might want to choose powerlifting audience instead of the other audiences. But this is another key element, because I see a lot of people, they come to me and they're like, yeah, hey, like I'm working on this idea, but I have no idea where to find people to talk to. And I'm saying, well, that's a really bad sign, because it's going to be 1,000 times easier for you to build a business around an idea where you already know 50 or 100 people that you can talk to right now. Research is easier. Getting first clients is easier. Like, spreading the word about your work is so much easier. It just makes everything 1,000 times easier. So if you do not have a network of those people, I would again try to filter some of these ideas out and focus on the ones where you do have a stronger network. Just as a rule of thumb, like, the bigger the network, the better the idea. And like, you can almost think of it as like a slider, right? So this is bad and this is good. So you can think about this, a slider or a scale or something like that. And if you have this much of a network versus this much, is going to be better, right? And then you have another slider for something like that, how excited you are. If you have this much excited, it's going to be better than this much excitement. If the audience has this much money available to pay, then this much is better. And then you just choose the ideas where you have the better numbers to pursue. And you basically, what you're doing at this step is you're filtering out the ideas that are here. Like, these are basically saying, like, you're saying, like, I'm not touching this. And then these might be the, possible candidates. And then you will test them and you will experiment with them to see which one of them is the best. But that's essentially what we're doing here. But anyhow, what you would do here is you would go through all of these filters. So for every aspect, you ask yourself, okay, so what are all the audiences that just don't have the money to pay? You filter them out. What are all the things that I'm just not good at? You filter them out. What are all the things that I'm just not excited about? You filter them out. What are all the audiences that I'm not, that I cannot relate to? You filter them out. And what are all the audiences that, I don't have a network in? And then you will go through this narrowing down process, and you might end up with one idea or 10 or 5 or 3 or something like that. And that's when you can go and you can actually test these ideas. Now, if you have too many ideas, let's say you go through all this filtering, you still think like there's like 10 different markets that would be good, and you're just not sure, which of them you want to test first. Start with excitement. The idea that you're most excited to pursue, the idea that you're most wholeheartedly want to talk about for hours and hours on end, that's the idea that you should start with. Like, it just makes your life so much easier. It makes it easier. You don't have to motivate yourself to get the work, and you don't have to worry about not having the time, because you'll make the time for it. So if you have 10 ideas, just start with testing the ones that you're most excited about. But then again, when you have gone through this process, it might look something like this, that you come up with ideas like this. So let's say that my candidates would be, one of them would be bracing, because nobody really teaches that. I haven't really found anyone teach that online for powerlifting that well. And I don't know if people would want to pay for that, or if a lot of people want to learn about that. But it is enough information for me to go and see, like, okay, let me test this. Let me see if there's some traction there. The next thing would be, let's say, the bench only training plan, because that's something that I tried to find, because I am going to compete in bench press again in the future. I tried to find the training plan online. I just couldn't find it. So I'm thinking, okay, somebody should really create this in the future so people could at least buy it or something, because I was ready to buy, but again, there was just nobody offering something like this. And then the third example would be, let's say, the water cut, because that's also something that I noticed when I decided to go on my own water cut, like to lose weight for a couple of competitions before the competition. There's just no good information out there. Like, you cannot really rely on it. You can see that it's kind of made up. There's no explanations, like, how you should alter things if you want to lose 2 kilos or 3 or 5. And it happened to me on quite a few occasions that I lost too much weight, and there's just not a great experience. So those 3 ideas are the candidates that I would take into the third stage, which is testing. Then I would go and spend maybe a week or so testing each of these audiences, testing each of these ideas. Watch the validation video if you haven't done it yet, because that's where I walk through the whole process. I'm not going to repeat it here. But then essentially, when you're there, you're going to come up with this kind of, let's say, a chart. So there's going to be some ideas that you're going to be more excited about than others. And then there's going to be certain ideas that will get more traction than others. And let's say you test 3 ideas, they're going to be something like this. So these 2 kind of like got equal traction. This got a bit less, this one had a little bit less traction, and maybe there's another one that got a lot less traction, but you're really excited about. So you would go and you would basically analyze these ideas and then pick the one that has the most traction and the most excitement, and that's the one that you decide to spend your time on. So that's how you can further narrow down the ideas. And typically, a lot of ideas are unfortunately not going to get as much traction as you want to. So when you find, ones that do, typically you are going to be more excited about them as well, and then you can start pursuing them. But again, if you have multiple ideas with the same amount of traction or very similar, then definitely choose the one that you're the most excited about. And then you can stop worrying about choosing your target audience because you've already done that, and you can go and actually start talking to them and testing things with them and so on and so on. So that's how I would go through this process for this first example. I'm going to show you 2 more examples, and I'm not going to go in as much detail in some ways. Like, I'm just not going to explain some of the things in as much detail. But I do want to give you examples so that you can find different ways, because we did this for weightlifting, but I want to also give you different examples from different industries. So I can again show you just how I think about this, and so you can really immerse yourself in this subject and you can learn as much as you want to from it. And before we dive into that, I do want to cover one small thing as well, which is a question that might pop up, which is my niche or my target market too broad or too specific? So this is a question that I get a lot, and once you go through this process, you should have a pretty good idea of the answer to this question. And the way that you do it is this way. First of all, you want to test your ideas. If you haven't tested your ideas, you almost have no right of asking this question, because you're asking this question to get validation from somebody else who is not in your target audience. Even if they're a business coach, they cannot give you feedback that would be as good as getting the data from your market. So don't use this question as an excuse to test your ideas. Instead, go test your ideas, validate them. Again, watch the video if you don't know how that I recorded on this topic, but test these ideas, and then you're going to be able to see. If the idea is too specific, what will happen is that you will typically get no traction. And no traction will be because too few people care. This means that people will not be searching for this. Like, there's not going to be really that much competition, but like whenever you post about it, whenever you ask people about it, they're very indifferent about it. There's no huge traction. Nobody's asking to hire you. Typically, when your idea is so specific and you've chosen something that maybe the audience isn't willing to pay for or something like that, that's what's going to happen. You're not going to see much traction, and you're going to have to switch to targeting a different audiences, or a different problem, and then you're going to be able to perhaps find that traction. But when you go to this too specific and you test the idea and you don't see traction, chances are that your idea is too specific, or you're just focusing again on the wrong problem or the wrong audience. That's what's going to happen. If your idea is too broad, then what's going to happen is, again, no traction. But this is not going to be because not many people would care about this, but it would be because there are too many competitors. So essentially, this is like productivity nowadays. If you go and try to test an idea of just general productivity to everybody, you will probably not get much traction, just because people feel like, well, I've seen that has been taught a million times before. I know about habits, I know about goals, there's nothing new, There's this saturated market, a lot of people are teaching that, there's nothing new. And then that means that your idea is too broad. Like, you did not pick a specific enough market that would actually care about what you would have to say. So again, it's not going to be any traction, but you will see a lot of competitors. So here, like, you will typically, here it's going to be no competitors. And here, many competitors. So that's going to be the difference, but you're going to get no traction on either of this, right? And when you see massive traction, So when you see massive traction with your idea, which means that, people are very excited that this exists, they want to hire you, they want to work with you, like there's people are talking about things that you're sharing, they're sharing them, and so on and so on, that's when you know that your idea is just right. And that's when you can be really happy and you're going to make your audience really, really happy. So that's why I think asking this question without doing the testing and validation, you cannot know how much traction there would be. So it's a pointless question to ask. Because I don't know, if you ask me, is it too broad or too specific? I don't know. I will tell you hey, take this audience. My assumption is that it's too broad and you're not going to see traction, but go test it out and see what happens. And if you don't see any traction and there are a lot of competitors, go more specific on it. And that's going to be a lot better for you. Okay, so that's how I would cover that. Now, as I know you're very, very eager to learn and you're eager to find more examples from me, we're going to do it more. So let's do another example. So example number 2. How the hell do I draw this one? I don't know, but what does this look like to you? Let's play a game. Probably have no idea what's happening. What if I draw this here, and then what if I draw this, and then what if I do my best attempt at quickly drawing some kind of a person, which feels like a horrible idea. But let's say that this is a climbing wall and this is a person who's climbing. You probably get the idea now. Okay, not the best thing, but let's talk about climbing. This is another one of my passions, one of my hobbies, one of the things that I'm really excited about. Just climbing. And you can slice and dice climbing into hell of many different ideas. And let's just go through it really, really quickly. Let's take our knife and let's just start slicing this baby up. So always nationality, language. Climbing is kind of exploding over the past few months, over the past few years. It's really an up and coming industry. I think it's a great industry to build an online business in. And I feel like in the English market, it's becoming slowly a little bit more and more saturated, at least with the free content online on YouTube. There's other avenues where it's still very underserved, like books, like written content, like online courses, like coaches. There's very underserved there, but at least in terms of free content, it's becoming more and more saturated. But chances are that in German language or in French or something like that, it's very underserved. So that might be a possible, avenue to explore. Then next thing, let's just go into, where should we start? Indoor climbing versus outdoor. That's, immediately, you can slice and dice in that way. Do you focus on indoor or do you focus on outdoor? And then maybe if you're focusing even on, let's say, building a home wall, that's a completely random idea, but that's something a lot of people are doing nowadays. Maybe there's a course, maybe there isn't a course. I don't know if there's a lot of resources on building a home wall there. Next, you could split this into top rope versus bouldering. So in case you have no idea what that means, top rope means that you're climbing on, it's probably called something else. I actually have no idea what it's called. Just regular rock climbing, I guess. So you could climb with a rope, or you could climb for just a few meters without a rope. And then even here, you have indoor top rope, outdoor top rope, indoor bouldering, outdoor bouldering. So you could already slice and dice the market in that way. Then you could have top rope, which is basically, climbing again, the rope is, above you and you can only fall for, let's say, half a meter. Or you could also teach lead climbing, which is different, because that means that there's no rope above you. This means that you are clipping the rope into places, you're maybe even bolting things, and drilling things into walls. And there, if you fall, you might fall for 6 or 15 or 30 meters. So there's different safety concerns, there's different techniques for clipping things. It's a whole different world, much more dangerous. But that's maybe something that you could focus on, one of these two specific areas, right? Then you have single pitch versus multi-pitch. So what this means is, like, when you're climbing, you have a rope, and maybe that rope is like 30 meters long. So if you're climbing some kind of a wall and that's 30 meters long, that's single pitch climbing. But then if you're climbing a wall that's, let's say, 90 meters high, then you have to actually, first person has to climb up here and the second person has to climb up here, and then they have to move here, and then they have to move here and, climb for another, let's say, 30 meters, and then move here and climb for another 30 meters. And there's all of these different techniques of what it's called multi-pitch climbing that you have to learn how to do it safely, what to do in certain situations. But if you get stuck in a wall, like, there's a lot of things that you can talk about. So you could further slice and dice the market this way. Next, you can just think about areas that you want to teach climbing in. Like, there are certain areas, like, all over the world that are maybe a little bit more popular. So I'll say Himalayas. This is more alpinism, mountaineering, but that's maybe like you want to teach people, how to, like, all about Himalayas and what they, like, if I want to go into Himalayas, like, what do I need to do? What do I need to learn? And maybe there's a way that you can teach that. Next, you could focus on the area like Fontainebleau. And this is like this great area with a lot of like big rocks, southeast of Paris, like, that's well known for bouldering. Or you could focus on Yosemite. So that's, where you have like El Capitan and all those like amazing, huge, big walls, and you could focus on that. You could even focus on climbing in Slovenia. Like, maybe talking about like the local climbing spots and things like that. Because right now you can buy these written guides and there's like this crappy websites that you can look at, but there's nothing really incredible there. I'm pretty sure that there's a market for that there as well. So you could go and just focus on very specific areas. Then the next thing is you can have age. So you could actually teach climbing to kids, because unlike weightlifting, like, you can learn how to climb very, 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 very early. And I see a lot of people are using this. Like, they have these climbing gyms that are just very fun oriented. There's virtual reality climbing gyms. There are all of these kind of things that are specifically targeting kids nowadays. And just like that, you could talk about riding for kids. Let's say you want to teach your kid how to climb because you've climbed, like, as a hobby for your whole life, but you're not really sure how to teach your kid well, or like what kind of like exercise to give him to make it fun for him, and how much you should give him to climb, and so on and so on. You might have those kind of questions as a parent, or you might just have your own gym and you might want to start creating some online classes or in-person classes, and so on and so on. So you could just target kids. You could even target pros, not technically age, but like you could be a coach for professional rock climbers. You could target seniors, because they might want different things that the people who are less, who are younger, who might not have certain, problems with some of their, hips or whatever. Like, they might have certain concerns that other people don't have, and so on and so on. So you could, again, slice and dice, the market this way. Then again, we already talked about bouldering. You could talk about climbing gear. That's an area. There's like, for each of these areas that I just talked about so far, you can talk about climbing gear, like the people who want to get the best possible gear. So you could talk about that as well. And then let's see, what else can you do? So you can focus on the model again. So it could be in person or online. And you can use online content and an online business to really support or fuel your in-person stuff as well. Like, for example, let's say you write a lot of content about climbing in the Slovenian language. Then I want to hire a climbing coach. I'm probably going to hire you so we can go, together to the local climbing wall and you will teach me how to do it rather than another random person, that I've never heard of. So you can also use that to fuel that. And then again, you can think about how to monetize it, but you can have a lot of your content online. And then again, you think about it in different ways. Is it like a one-on-one? Is it like a workshop, like a one-time workshop? Is it a 4-week class? Because there might be a niche for some kind of this model, like people who want this specific thing, but they cannot get it. Especially in more saturated markets, there might be, a way that you can find people who are looking for this specific thing. Like I just talked to a friend and he said that he really struggled with trying to find a memory coach because he's willing to pay, he's able to pay, he wants to hire the best people, but they either ignore his emails, which is like something that has happened to me when I looked for climbing coaching or climbing courses. People just don't respond to you, or there's just nobody that's good out there. Sometimes people are actively looking for something like that. What else? So let me just look at my notes briefly because there's a lot more things. Okay. You could also, target people who want to go to climbing competitions. So that's another avenue of, there's a special way that you prepare, the special way in how these competitions work, how to prepare for a competition. That's, something that not many people actually talk about. Like, how do you prepare for a climbing competition? There's very little content about it on the internet, especially long-term plans. There's not much about that out there. Then you could focus on the level. So it could be beginner, it could be pro, or it could be advanced. So beginner climbing content, advanced, when you've got the basics down, or when you're pro, when you're competing, it's going to be very, very different businesses if you focus on the specific audiences. Okay. And then what else can you do? You can focus on different areas of climbing. For example, let's say alpinism. So again, this isn't super related to this. It's technically not climbing, or some of it is. I'm not going to go into details on that. This is just to show you the exercise. Even I could say Via Ferrata, which I know it's not climbing, but it is a thing where you climb mountains on over steep walls, and there's nobody teaching you how to do that on the internet. I couldn't find it. That's actually a big niche there for that. What else do you have? So you have this, and then you have mountaineering. These are kind of adjacent industries. But then you also have things like ice climbing. Maybe there's a niche there. Then you have big walls. So big walls, these are walls of 700 meters that you climb over, multiple days. Maybe you have high altitude climbing. Maybe there's certain ways in which you have to climb when you're over 6,000 meters. Then we can do more of this. There's more ways to break things down and slice and dice them. So we could, think about the materials. So is it granite? Is it limestone? Then it's also different type of climbing. There's cracks. So cracks would be when you have a wall, there's this crack all over the wall, and you can kind of jam your feet and hands in and kind of climb up this crack. That's a specific, climbing technique. Or it might be arêtes. I think it's like this, where you basically climb on a, let's say, on a corner of something. Let's say you try to climb just one of the pillars of the bridge that goes above the water, and you could actually climb that, if you have the proper technique. Could even teach climbing to parkour people. So that's an interesting audience, people who want to climb things, just who want to learn how to climb roofs and things like that. Maybe you have a lot of climbing experience and you can show them how to do some of these things safely. And then there's a lot of things like technique as well. So you can take a deeper look at technique as well. So for example, climbing technique, there's different types of holds or different ways in which you can grip something. There's this thing called crimps that are just really tiny holds. Then there's these things that are called heel hooks, which basically means when you're climbing and there's a wall, you basically have your foot here, right? and you basically use your heel on this wall to generate pressure and to stay on the wall. Then there's maybe some dynamic climbing. There's these things called dynos when, like, you know, you're jumping and so on and so on. And like all of these things, like there's space on the internet if you go more specific like this. There's people who want to learn these things. There's no good materials out there on these things. You have to do the research and you have to really see and you have to really test like what catches traction or not. But I would say that in here, there's probably like 10 different target audiences, 10 different business ideas, if not more, that could really take off, because I feel like, you know, climbing, for example, is such an underserved market. So that's how I would analyze that. You can see some of the things are similar, like, you know, yeah, you can use some of the age, you can use some of the nationality, maybe some of the models of like in person, you know, and so on are kind of similar. Some of the things are just going to be very industry specific, like things like, you know, different types of climbing, different climbing areas, and so on. And I really encourage you to slice and dice like your industry, your market in different ways and think about it, so you can really find something that works for you, that there is a gap in the market, and that you can really be excited about it. So, okay, let's say I worked on this idea. Let's say I came up with a few candidates. So that would be step number 2. So I come up with a couple of different candidates, and let's say one of the candidates is indoor bouldering. So that's the thing where you just climb for a few meters. You're doing it indoors. And I want to create training plans because it's really hard to find them on the internet. Great, that's one idea. Another idea that I could test is, let's say, indoor top rope. So that's basically climbing with a rope. Beginners technique. So I could teach that. Or maybe the third idea that I would go and test and validate is introduction to climbing for kids. So that's the audience, that's the target audience is here, or actually the parents of these kids, but that's, you know, who you're creating the exercises for. Again, I would test these ideas, and again, I would choose, and again, I would factor in both traction that I get, as well as how excited I am about the idea. So that's the second example, and I'm not gonna go into how I would test this in detail because you can again use the exact same techniques as in the validation video. So let's actually go and look at the third example. So this one is gonna be related to the industry that I'm in, or kind of like related to it. Let's see if you can guess what this one is. And do remember to pause the video and essentially think about how you would slice and dice this industry, especially if you are kind of like familiar with this. So the thing that I want to teach you right now is how you could slice and dice the market of being a freelance copywriter. So that's somebody that writes things like sales pages and blog posts and, you know, ebook covers and all of those things. Like every time where there's like certain words or like on websites and things like that, and you know, you want to hire somebody to do the writing for you because you're too busy and you have too much work on your hands because your business is growing too rapidly, you would hire a freelance copywriter. So if I was a freelance copywriter, and I know I already shared this example in an earlier video, but I do want to go in a little bit more depth into it. If you're a freelance copywriter, how can you find your own niche where you're not competing with many people and where you can really make a difference for people? And also, you know, find a profitable idea, find a profitable target audience. Basically, you can always start with something like nationality or language. We already said that this is the very first thing that you can always start with, especially if you're not English speaking. You can always think like, oh, you know, are there any local businesses I can help? Are there any, you know, like, can I, you know, just become the go-to person in Slovenia, become one of the best copywriters there? You could focus on that. If not, there's plenty of other ideas that you can have as well. So for example, you could focus on different business types. And this is where I go a little bit crazy and just show you a lot of different examples of who you could write copy for. Let's go through it quickly. Gyms could write copy for them. Restaurants, they want more, people to eat their food. They have email lists, they have websites. Restaurants, okay. Dentists, they might need, you to write content for them or copy so they can again get more clients from the internet. Plastic surgeons, maybe online fitness websites. Maybe like somebody has a really like let's say like P90X, or there's certain types of websites that sell fitness products online. If you get really good at writing copy for them, you can write the copy for a couple of them. Yoga studios. Next, let's bring back CrossFit gyms. And while we're there, let's also focus on climbing gyms, because there's plenty of those in the world, and I'm pretty sure that most of them don't have copywriters but would benefit from some of them. So climbing gyms. What else? Real estate. Real estate is like an area where they have to write a lot of copy for their ads, and if they don't know how to do it well, they don't sell their real estate. Airbnb. You could teach people who have their own Airbnbs how to write their listings. I think that's actually a brilliant idea, or just write it for them. Hotels, spas, hair salons, massages, or massage salons, and so on and so on. Think of all the different businesses. Find a business that you can help, boost their revenues tremendously. Find a business where they don't have much competition, where not many, copywriters are focusing specifically on that. And then you can very easily find a niche where you can just become the go-to person and add a lot of value. And it makes all the other steps a lot easier. So you could definitely think about different business types. Again, then you can think about, let's say, business models. So this depends on what your audience would be selling. And that could be, let's again go on a little bit of a rampage, masterminds. Like maybe you're selling a restaurant, mastermind, you want somebody to write the copy or a funnel for that. And then you become the go-to guy for selling like high-ticket masterminds. Online summits. Online summit requires a lot of copy to write, and you might want to hire a copywriter to help you out with that. Conferences, you need to sell those as well. Maybe they're just selling ebooks and they need somebody to write those ebooks or help them sell those ebooks. Maybe they want to sell, low price courses like $49 courses. Or premium, like $2,000 courses. Like requires a different skill set and different experience and a different sales funnel and different sales process. High ticket offers, maybe they want to sell $10,000 coaching programs, and again, they want somebody to write copy to help them with that. Maybe they sell retreats. And so on and so on and so on. Regardless of what people sell, like if you can specialize in just this one audience, that really just creates retreats. You serve one person in one space, and then you get an amazing testimonial or case study, and then you can help another person who is in a similar situation but runs retreats in a different industry, and then you just become the go-to person in that industry, and that's how you find that target audience. And then finally, we can also look at something like copy type. So I mentioned this in one of the previous videos. I mentioned that there's this guy on Upwork that charges a lot of money for essentially writing Amazon listings. And that's the thing that he specializes in, because most people are just general copywriters, and I would rather hire somebody that already has a lot of experience in this specific thing that I'm trying to do. So maybe you focus on that. Maybe you focus on books or book covers. Maybe focus on Facebook ads, ebooks, ultimate guides. I already mentioned in one of the previous videos that this is super lucrative because people can pay you between $2,500 and $5,000 for a single guide if you write it, and it helps them get more clients. Maybe you can specialize in simple 1 week funnels. That's more for like the $49 course. Maybe you specialize in something like longer sales funnels, like 2 to 4 week funnels. Maybe you specialize in so-called tripwire funnels. Not a huge fan of those, but perhaps there is demand for that. Webinars. Maybe you specialize in just putting together webinars or webinar funnels. You just figure out how to do that really well. Autoresponders, like this would be, let's say, really useful for gyms when they sign up a new member, that like you can sell them on certain things that would be valuable to them afterwards, because typically gyms just capture email addresses and never do anything with them. Or sales or campaigns or things like that. Let's say you want to write copy for sales for big clothing companies or things like that. Abandoned cart sequences, like that's actually a pretty huge thing for a lot of people, like that have a lot of paying customers. Like a lot of people might have a lot of paying customers and they click on their shopping cart and then they leave the shopping cart and they decide not to buy our product. There's this things called abandoned cart sequences that basically invite these people to purchase anyway, even though they left the cart, and they work fairly well and they need copywriters to write this. You could also focus on sales pages. You could specialize in short or long form. Sales emails, blogs, engagement emails. There's like a million things that you could do. And you're thinking, okay, this is a video about target audience. How does this relate? Well, it does relate, because you're not saying I'm serving small business owners that are 47 to 55 years old. You're saying like, hey, if you're a small business owner and you want somebody to help you sell more of your ebooks, then I can help. And that way it's a very specific, very simple target audience. And if there's a gap in the market, you might catch a lot of traction. So this is how I would slice and dice this one. Again, there's more ways to do it, but I did want to just go deep on a couple of different categories. And you can always come up with your own creative ways. There's no right or wrong way to do this. Like, I want you to just get a lot of ideas and then do this yourself and experiment with it. And then, what you want to do is, again, narrow down ideas. You want to narrow down your ideas. For example, I would narrow down to something like Airbnb listings. I think that's a brilliant idea, because I just think writing copy for Airbnb listings would be fun. I feel like there could be a gap in the market there. Maybe some people already teach it, but that could just be very interesting idea. Dentists might be another idea, because I have a dentist friend and maybe I could ask him like, hey, do you want some help with that copy? And then I could do a great case study, and then he knows a lot of other dentists and he could, maybe from other countries, and he could refer me to them. Next, something like sales emails for gyms in Slovenia. Maybe I could help that specific audience. And then I would take these ideas, test, see if there's traction, how excited I am to actually pursue them. And then finally, choose an idea. So I really encourage you to go through this process that we went over today and all the different examples. I encourage you to do it for your own idea. Don't worry about making it perfect, but you can take just half an hour and just, think about all the different ways in which you can slice and dice the market. And then the next step is go and test this idea. So if you're not sure about your target audience, again, you can know if it's specific or is it too specific or too broad by following this chart that I share with you. So if it is too specific, you're not going to see any traction and there's not going to be any competitors. If it's too broad, there's not going to be any traction and there's going to be too many competitors. And if it's just right, you're likely going to find massive traction. But I encourage you to test your ideas, play around with this, test your ideas, see how things go. Definitely let me know how it works out for you as well. And then if you want more, I will be creating a lot more of these videos in the future about things like research. There might be a couple of other videos I do on these business ideas as they come to mind, as I keep answering all of your questions. So if you have questions, let me know. I'd be happy to help. But then also, make sure you go to my website. Go to this link in the description below this YouTube video. You might have to click like the show more button. But I wrote this massive guide. It's like almost, I think it's a 100-page long guide about starting a 6-figure online business. And in this guide, I do a couple of things. First of all, I share you my story of how I built my own online business so you can kind of see what it really takes to build an online business. And if you're new to this channel, then you can learn about my story a little bit better. Second, I show you my system for starting and growing your online business. So on a high level, you can understand what's waiting for you ahead of you. And I am going to keep creating these videos to help you through every step of the way. And then in the third part, I also cover advanced strategies that you can use to scale from, earning, let's say, 30,000 a year with your online business all the way to 6 figures. So that might be interesting for you. Just to understand what are some of the advanced things you should be doing, what are some of the mistakes you can make along the way so you can avoid them, and so on and so on. It's a really detailed guide. Just click on the link. You can choose to download the PDF and then you can email me as well directly on the email address where I send you the things from. But more importantly, you can just read this guide. There's a lot of examples, a lot of my own story. I show you a lot of things. It's a really cool guide. I spent quite a lot of time putting together. There's nothing like this out there for building an online business. So yeah, again, I share my full story, the exact things that work for me. So just like I'm making these videos really, really detailed, I also write really detailed stuff. So if you haven't checked it out yet, definitely go check that out. And if you're liking these videos, let me know, comment below this video, or, let me know via email, share it with people that would, enjoy watching this video, help me spread the word. And hopefully, I will see you in the next video that I create. Have an awesome day, and I'll talk to you soon.